Rock isn't dead. It's in flux.
Hi, everyone. I'm Britt with Rock and Flux, and I am joined by Jason Corbett of the band Actors, and we're going to talk a little bit about them today. So, Jason, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you. So let's get into talking about your band. You all are based out of Vancouver. Is that correct, in Canada?
Correct.
So you have had 3 official albums that you've released, starting with It Will Come to You in 2018. And for that, is that when you signed with Artifact Records to release that album? How did that all come about?
Yeah, I was after we're releasing singles, Artifact Records had approached us about putting a full-length record. We entered into that, and we recorded and finished It Will Come to You, and that was released in 2018. So That was our first official full-length record.
What was the response like when you all first released that? And what was it like working with Artifact? Are they based out of Canada as well, but the owner is in Iceland? How does that all work?
Right, yeah. Well, there's partners, the 2 partners who own Artifact, and one of them lives in Toronto, and it's a Toronto-based company, and the other partner lives in Iceland.
Okay, cool. And then did you tour at all for that album, or was it just like kind of release and then do social media and that sort of thing?
Well, before the record came out, we had played mostly locally in Vancouver, and once the record came out, the week it came out, we had already booked a small West Coast U.S. tour that was really poorly attended, and then all of a sudden we started getting offers from kind of in Europe, in the UK, in the US to, play festivals. Like we played WGT in Leipzig. We played Infest in the UK, played Cold Wave. Basically, within a month or so of that record being out, our profile just, grew enough that we could tour all over. So we ended up playing, probably on that record, we played close to 200 to 250 shows before the pandemic hit.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. And then you followed that up with the album Acts of Worship, and that came out in 2021, but you recorded all of that during COVID, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
And how was that recording? Like when you recorded It Will Come to You, were you all kind of together for recording that album? And then did you have to kind of change your process when COVID hit, or how did that all come together?
Well, the record recorded in the studio, Jackknife Sound, here in Vancouver. And basically, most of the process is just me in the room. And then I have the band members, come in and contribute their parts. So the songwriting part of it is me. I can get a lot of the work done, ahead of time before the band members come in. So luckily, we all live really close to each other as well. So anytime I need any of them in the studio, it's really easy to do.
That's good. So, did you all kind of just keep each other in your bubble during COVID so you could still have those, like when you needed someone to come in and record something, or did you kind of still stay separated? Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I don't recall, I think you all did a tour in the spring of this year. Was that before or after? That was after Reanimated, which is your latest album, was released.
We had released Reanimated. And Reanimated is basically, that's all the singles that we had released before we signed to Artifact. So it's all, there's no new music, it's all pre-2017. I had self-released that.
Okay.
And then Artifact, we had decided to put it out officially through Artifact and also offer more tracks, kind of fleshing it out, making a full album.
Mm-hmm.
When the restrictions from the pandemic kind of relaxed a little bit, we did 2 tours in the U.S., we toured the UK, and then we toured in Europe as well.
Yeah, I did see that tour was pretty extensive that you had done with that one. I did notice on Reanimated that there's more versions of the song Post-Traumatic Love. There's several remixes on that. Was there a reason that there were more versions of that song?
So after we released Post-Traumatic Love, that was our very first single. And so I had reached out to several artists that I had admired, and they did remixes of the song, but those remixes had never been released on vinyl before. So we decided to include them on the Reanimated. So people could have them on record.
Cool. Another question that I have for you. So you all are based in Vancouver, but you've obviously played all over the place, and you've done, several tours throughout the United States. Are the audiences different between Canada and America? And is the music scene for you all different in playing both countries?
I've been asked this question before, where it's like, oh, what are some of the better cities, or are you treated better here or there? I think the reality of it is that our fans, we have a connection with them. Really, like, from city to city, it's negligible. Like, I really feel like our fans are our fans, and we have a great reaction, no matter if it's in Spain or if it's in the UK or Los Angeles or Vancouver. So I would say, like, music scene-wise, our experience is that, our fans are enthusiastic in every city that we go to.
Do you think that's because I tend to feel it's interesting to me because you all kind of get grouped into the new term as post-punk. And I feel like post-punk, it's very broad because there's several different styles of music that can really fall under that category. And you are kind of like the more like dark wave, synth heavy type of music. Do you think that fans of that type of music tend to be a little bit different and maybe a little more involved, I think, than maybe other genres?
Yeah, I think that's also reflected in social media too. There's subgenres of goth, post-punk, and darker music need to really connect throughout the world online. And there's a very kind of tribal kind of fan base of this music. And I don't see that existing in all types of music. I think maybe with metal that happens. And then, of course, with the different genres that we play around with like the different festivals we play and whatnot. But yeah, I think a little more mainstream or indie rock or indie. There's a little less community online, it feels like. So yeah, I do feel that, and I don't know what that is exactly. I think the outsiders kind of band together,
right? And I mean, what made you have you always liked that type of music? So that's why you kind of just gravitated to that's the kind of music you wanted to create?
I spent years kind of playing music and trying to write songs a certain way to perhaps be successful or to a wider audience. And when I stopped thinking about any of that, it just kind of forgot. I don't want to say gave up hope. I just was like, you know what, screw the music industry. I'm just going to play what I want to play. That's how active music came about. And to be honest, I really didn't know there was any scene anywhere. I wasn't involved with anything dark wave or post-punk in terms of communities online or anywhere around the world. So I was just drawing from my experiences from my childhood and my production style. And it just so happened someone was like, oh, yeah, he does sound kind of post-punk or this or that. So if it's easier for people to discover us, that's great. But I don't really feel boxed in by any kind of genre, or I didn't try to write towards any type of genre.
I mean, who do you feel your influences have been in music since you've been growing up?
Well, since I've been growing up, there's been so many, but obviously David Bowie was huge. I went through a heavy metal phase. I went through, early teen Led Zeppelin phase, and then I was listening to Nick Cave. I was listening to Massive Attack, and so it was always changing, and always lots of different types of music. So somehow Actors has pieces of all of this that are just kind of filtered through my production sensibilities of what I do now. When I first started kind of writing for Actors with the first few songs, there were a few bands online, notably the KVB, the Soft Moon. Those were two artists that both of them had almost zero YouTube views, and I just kind of stumbled into this world of oh wow, what is this awesome music? It's not on a major label. They're doing their own thing. It has elements of this and that, but it felt original and it felt potent. And really, now what I've seen over the past 5 years is explosive of artists that probably were doing the same things I was doing, or, being influenced by the same things that were happening in real time, and realizing that the power was, in their hands to create music and release music and express themselves in their own way that's honest.
Yeah. Have you worked with either of those bands?
I haven't worked with them, no. I played a couple different shows with KDB, but no, as a producer or mixer or anything, I haven't worked with those two bands.
Okay. I did an interview with them. They're both great. I did an interview with KVB a couple of years ago. It was like a regular written one, but I agree, they're a good band. And I comparatively could see, because I obviously listened to both of you. So that definitely would make sense. And so you do a lot of like production and mixing work too. How does that kind of influence your take when you are writing a song or recording a song? Do you think that because that is a professional focus of yours, that you approach that differently, or you have does it give you a kind of a different perspective versus just being the artist side of it?
Well, what I like is to be able to use, my developing skills as a producer, like mixing, a mix engineer, to just convey my messages stronger. And that's a road that, you just continue to learn as you go. So I don't believe you ever stop learning it in that way. So working on other people's albums, mixing, mastering, all of those things, it's just a continual growth.
Right.
In terms of musical style, you're always borrowing things and learning things from different sources. And you just, ultimately, it's filtered through your taste.
Right.
And that's what keeps you original.
And I mean, if we were, not that I love comparing, artists, but for people who are listening to this, but maybe haven't listened to Actors before, I've seen it written that, some people would call you all a mix of bands like New Order and Interpol and, other new wave bands. How would you feel about that kind of comparison? And what would you tell someone who maybe hasn't heard you what they could expect?
Well, we get asked that at the airport all the time. Every time we fly somewhere.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, you're a band. What do you sound like?
Right.
And I'm like, I would just go, The Cure? Even though we don't sound like The Cure, but you just try and give people an idea of the mood. But, if we were continually compared to one band, then I'd be concerned. But it's so funny. We'll release singles, and I'll look on our YouTube comment section, and everyone thinks we sound like someone else. So it's comical, because sometimes the reference point, someone will say, oh, you sound like Nine Inch Nails, or you sound like, oh, you're a Joy Division ripoff, oh, you're trying to be The Cure, or Echo and the Bunnymen. It's like, really, we don't sound like any of those bands. It's just, there's a mood that some of those bands inherently have, and we have some of that mood as well. Like, something about us being both post-punk. Post-punk came at a time after punk where experimentation was on the table. There were synthesizers being used aggressively for the first time, being incorporated into music with different values than in the past. And that's what I believe with post-punk. We embody the spirit of post-punk. That, to me, is what I like to be recognized as. Yeah,
definitely. And I feel like post-punk and industrial music and the goth stuff as well, they all have some similar elements, because, I mean, when I listen to Actors, you have some songs that are a little bit darker and maybe a little more edgy, but then you have also some that are a little bit more dancey, like the song Love You More, or, so I think when you have a broader sound that you're capable of, and I think even bands like Nine Inch Nails could say that they have songs that kind of run that all those, areas as well. And I think that's kind of like the beauty of having a genre that maybe is a little bit more open, because it allows you to do all those. I mean, Health is another band. I just recently interviewed them as well. And they have the same kind of element. Like, they've done, metal remix songs with Lamb of God. And then they also have, more dance kind of heavier songs as well. As a listener, I find that to be a little bit more interesting, because you're not always, I mean, music for me at least is very mood based, whatever you're feeling at the time that you feel like listening to. So, having bands that can give you a variety of elements of a song and not just necessarily one specific type of thing, I think is a good thing.
I agree.
Because I think in the past, people were maybe a little bit less open to bands kind of, broadening that. But I think in recent years, people are more willing to listen to different things, which is good. And I don't know if that's social media and streaming services, because things are so available and it's not necessarily as album heavy. It's a lot of playlists and things like that.
Right.
But, it definitely has, I think, changed the landscape.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Sometimes I'll be working with an artist at the studio and they'll say, oh, well, I'm worried about like the third song or the fifth song because it's so different genre-wise.
Right.
And I'm saying like, it's coming from you. It's your voice on it. People will make that connection. Like, in the olden days, you'd go into the studio and record all the drum tracks, the bass tracks, all in the same few days. And
right.
So you had kind of the same drum sound throughout the whole record, and the record kind of cohesively sounded the same. But people no longer expect that. And I think they actually probably are welcoming the different variables on a record. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and I agree. And it's been interesting starting this podcast as well, and just talking to people about music and, creators, and also just people who listen to it a lot. I call this rock and flux, but for me, the genre of rock is all encompassing of really music in general. And I have realized from talking to people that genre is such a small caveat in the overall scene of music in general, that it's, I think even more so, it matters less. I think, in the early 2000s, it's funny because TRL was like the whole popular TV show, and it was very divided, I think, and genre was very, very paid attention to, because everyone kind of found their tribe, and there was new metal, and then there was the, the boy bands and Britney Spears and the pop stuff, and you couldn't like both. And now I'm pretty sure that there are plenty of people that would have all of that on a playlist potentially, and it's not necessarily thought of as anything weird. But back then it was, and it's very interesting.
Well, we're seeing new generations of musicians and music listeners coming up at a time when major labels aren't dictating to you who to listen to. It wasn't that long ago, like pre-streaming services or pirate downloading, where you got to watch MTV or Much Music in Canada and listen to radio. I remember driving home from work and putting on the radio and like, my God, how many times can I hear Alice in Chains and Nickelback? Like, and then you're lucky to find, some outlier band. So now you just have so much choice. We have all these smaller labels that are facilitating this real hunger for all these different genres of music. And the internet has it's this real bullshit meter where it's like you can bring the horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right? There's certain bands, certain music that just find its audience, and then there's certain artists you can throw money at, promote all over the place, and they just don't really catch on because people have the choice now.
Yeah, it is interesting because I used to work on that side of the industry, and it was very, very apparent back then that if money was thrown at an artist, they would perform. And there were some artists on those larger labels that were better, but they didn't necessarily want to put the money into them for whatever reason. And, back in the day, there used to be a lot of artist development. They would really, that industry would stick by a band. Like, for example, U2 didn't really have success until like their second or third album. And today, or not maybe as badly today, but back in the early 2000s and even a little later, that band never would have made it, because they would have just gotten dropped. So, which is unfortunate because, obviously music is meant to be consumed, but it's art and it's consumption. But like, I want to say it in a positive way, not necessarily a commercial way. It's art should be consumed by people who appreciate it, but you need the chance to hear it. So that was one thing that I think the streaming has been great because it's so easy. Sometimes it's hard to find, but it's also easy to find, the type of stuff that you're really looking for. So definitely has changed.
Yeah, the algorithms and suggestions, and there's all those debates about streaming that certain artists have, or, and it's funny because, think about streaming, because they don't get to resell you every changing format every billions of dollars. But there are artists like actors or letters where, without streaming, we would not have found an audience.
Yeah.
We have an audience. We can go to any city we've been to in the world. There's a fan base there singing our songs. That couldn't have happened without some sort of larger label support back in the day.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, that's how I found you all, was on Spotify. So absolutely true. And it's very interesting. And frankly, I'm glad for the change.
I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And ultimately, whether we like it or not, society is spoken and they want convenience.
Yeah.
And if that means songs are worth less, well, then as artists, we will shift and figure out how to monetize what we do and kind of reimagine the structure of, how artists make a living.
Yeah.
And in the end, if we embrace that technology and the reality of where we're at, where we're headed, then we're all going to be that much better for it.
So what is next for Actors? Is your plan to record, or is there not more touring in the future for you all, or what's next?
Well, right now we're putting the final touches on the Leathers record.
Okay.
So that's going to be out this year. And then the Actors is going to be doing some one-off dates for a couple different festivals. And we are headed back over this summer to Spain and Portugal, and then we go back again end of summer, and we're going to be in Germany and a few other countries in Europe before we come home September to kind of really get deep into finishing the next record, which we'll start releasing active singles sometime late this year, and then we'll release a full length in 2024.
And so for Leathers, I know that Shannon is the main singer for that. Are you all also part of that band? Well,
Leathers is Shannon, of course, and then Adam Fink, the drummer from Actors.
Yep.
And then Kendall Wooding, our bass player, is her guitar player and keyboard player. So it's basically Actors minus me, but I'm the producer.
Right.
So,
still heavily involved.
We did a tour where we all toured together across the U.S. from New York basically to L.A., and we had a blast.
Well, and it's kind of cool, I'm sure, for you to be kind of on both sides, because you're the singer for Actors, but then you got to do the producing for Leathers.
Right.
So.
Well, I have a sneaking suspicion I'm going to be really jealous in the coming years, because the Spotify performances for Leathers really seems to have taken off with just a short amount of songs. So I think with their first full length, we're going to see a really strong fan base for her music, because she's just so likable.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, but personally, I like both. So I'm happy. I hope that you both see a lot of success in the future, because I think the music for both of you is great.
The last question that I had for you that I typically ask everybody that comes on the show is your opinion on, is rock dead? My personal opinion is that it's not. It's in flux, which is why I named the show that name. So I would just be curious to know your thoughts on that.
Is rock dead? I was thinking about this yesterday. I was, of course, on social media and having a look at a bunch of different bands and people talking about touring and the costs of touring. And the point that kind of comes up, I find, is that I think the rock star is dead. That putting certain bands up on this super high pedestal, that they're like this unreachable rock star. I feel like the music is kind of a little more diverse and in the hands of the listener more with streaming. And I feel that, I'm seeing clips and footage from young bands and young people, teenagers and early 20s, like going to like these underground shows. And I'm like, oh, this is rock music. It's just the new face of it, And also, it's rock. It's that spirit of rebellion. So I think, even with certain bands, I remember in the 90s when, Chemical Brothers and Prodigy were coming out with kind of that big beat electronic music. To me, I thought, well, this is rock music. It had that same spirit. Yeah. So I think that spirit's never going to die. Maybe how it looks just slightly morphs and changes,
right?
Generation to generation.
Yeah, and in some ways, I almost feel like maybe it's a good thing that the whole rock star, quote unquote, as a persona is maybe not the way it was. And especially now with the way the music industry is, I think more musicians treat it like a business and treat it a little bit, not that it's not fun and things like that, but I think most bands today try to focus more on that and the sustainability of it versus let me, have the parties and that side of it. Not that to say it doesn't exist, but I just think it's not necessarily considered. I don't even know if that's considered as cool anymore.
Right.
It's more about like putting on the show and doing a good job and having that whole experience for your fans. So, which is a positive.
It's like connecting with the audience and with the band, and that connection, it starts with the songs and the music and the live experience, and then it continues on through your different avenues of social media, and that's something that actors have really embraced. And I feel like it's been a real positive for us.
Right. I also wonder with social media, in some ways, anyone famous for that matter was kind of like a mythological creature. You know what I mean? You didn't really know what they were doing. Now everyone's so connected and everybody kind of knows what everyone's up to. So I think it also kind of takes some of that mystique out, which there's, pluses and minuses to that too. But I do think that social media has likely, played a part in that as well. So
for sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
I agree.
And I appreciate you, taking the time to talk with me and answer my questions and have, some of these conversations. I think it's been interesting for me to talk about all of these different things with, the various bands and artists that, that I talk to through this. And I always find it interesting to hear people's perspective. That's actually you're the first person to say that about like the rock star persona piece of it dying. Right. And I never really thought about it that way, but it's definitely a relevant way to look at it.
Even certain artists that I look at, these personas and this like bigger than God type personas, I don't think they age very well. Like I look at the backlash. There's like this backlash, I feel like, with Bono, and I was watching a documentary about like U2 in the 90s and with Uptown Baby, and he said he was playing like this character with the sunglasses, the fly or whatever.
Yeah.
For some reason, I look at him like, oh wow, in today's world, it comes across as, I don't know, it felt kind of a little pompous and distasteful. And at the time, I remember really enjoying it. But in retrospect, seeing the live footage, I was like, oh, I don't really like this as much. So I wonder, it's maybe a reflection of society and how we shift and how we kill our idols in the long run. Yeah. I don't know how, if you live long enough, you become the villain.
Well, and I mean, even like, you look at bands like Motley Crue, and they were known so much for the whole partying and everything like that. But at a certain point, when they get older, that doesn't really age well because no one wants to see their grandfather, getting completely wasted. It loses some of the cool aspect and anymore. And it goes back to, looking at it as a business for bands. It's like, if you want to have longevity and be able to tour into your, 50s and 60s, which plenty of bands do, the partying isn't necessarily where it's at because you want your fans to like your music enough, regardless of the situation they're listening to it in, So
yeah, and I saw a tweet the other day, and it said that there seems to be this trend of all these cool people who are quitting drinking.
Right.
I thought, like when I was growing up, the message I was getting from the bands around at the time was, drink and party, and that was celebrated. So, at a young age, I was like, we got to drink to be cool. And I look back now and I think, wow, like, it's like that part of our society I felt like was broken almost, and it was being like wholly endorsed by pop culture and the media. I definitely felt that a shift away from that.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting how time changes things.
Any other parting thoughts or things that you'd like to tell the audience about Actors or Leathers?
We're on all streaming platforms. We're on Bandcamp. You can go to our website, actorsband.com, and get to all of our resources from there.
If you were telling someone who was starting out listening to you, is there a particular album or some particular songs that you would say to start out with? Or can they really start anywhere?
You can start anywhere.
Well, thank you, Jason. I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I appreciate you taking some time to talk to me. And you can find your music on Spotify. I know you all have videos on YouTube as well. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we will check in again soon.